You're listening to the Stokes podcast, real and inspiring conversations with individuals from all over the world, sharing their insights on sustainability, fashion, conscious consumerism and empowerment. Be inspired to take action and be the change you want to see in the world. Welcome to the Stokes podcast. On today's episode, I have Julian Ellis-Brown with me. Welcome, Julian. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Lou. Thank you very much for having me on. I'm really pleased to be here.
Amazing. Thank you for your time. So Julian is the co-founder and CEO of Saltyco, which is an early stage startup in the innovative textile industry.
That's correct. We are, yeah.
Amazing. So Julian, why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself and on your sustainable and fashion journey?
Sure, absolutely. So I originally trained in engineering and mechanical engineering. That was sort of my original background, but where my kind of design, I guess, journey really sort of started and took off was when I moved into my postgraduate course, which was at Imperial College London and the Royal College of Art. And from this postgraduate course is where Saltyco was really born. And it's a really amazing program which brings together interdisciplinary groups of designers, engineers, and sort of many other disciplines as well, with people from a range of different points in their careers. So you get this real melting pot of like innovation, design, and different perspectives. And it was really from that which really kind of enabled us to start thinking through the lens of social impact and environmentalism. And it's where I met my co-founders. And that's where Saltyco really started.
Amazing. So why don't you tell our listeners a bit about Saltyco and what it is you actually do?
Sure. So Saltyco is a next generation textile manufacturing company. So we're looking at how what the next sort of like range and degree of textiles will look like. For the past sort of hundreds and thousands of years even, we've selected a mixture of conventional textiles in the past 100 years, had a series of innovations. So we've moved from everything from plant-based cotton and obviously animal-based textiles as well, and then more recently into sort of petroleum-based sources. And now we're seeing a new wave of innovation, which is looking at what the next generation of textiles will look like. And Saltyco is looking at that as well. And one of the key sort of motivators and drivers for looking at those new textiles is, of course, the environmental crisis that our planet's in, and how we can devise more sensitive materials given those the conditions that we find ourselves in. The textiles industry is one of the most damaging industries in the world at the moment. It produces a huge amount of carbon emissions, has a massive strain on our natural resources, and is really threatening our precious ecosystems and biodiversity. And it turns out that about 70% of that impact comes from right at the start of the supply chains and like from raw material sourcing. And so this is where my co-founders and I realized where we could try and innovate to make the most impact. And so that's where Saltyco's really started on the journey, is looking at how we can get our materials from more, not just less damaging sources, but actually from sources which are regenerative in their nature, which are positive. And I could talk a little bit more about the way we do that. But our first product is called BioPuff, and it's a plant-based alternative to goose-down or synthetic fillers for use in insulation for outerwear and jackets.
Yeah, I saw that on your website. I was going to ask you about that, actually. It's fascinating. So can you talk a little bit more about BioPuff and how it's developed?
Sure. So BioPuff started and from as a result of a materials exploration, excuse me, into how we can explore different sources of materials from plants which might grow and different plants which grow in more extreme and more regenerative circumstances. So where we really started was looking at, okay, so we understand that the fashion industry has all of these very damaging supply chains. We know the sources of materials where a lot of these problems are deriving from. How can we explore some of the world's most beneficial environments and see how those environments might be able to supply us with healthier materials instead, with the idea that if we can encourage more of these environments to exist through an incentivization from connecting them to a fashion supply chain, we'll be able to encourage more regeneration and healing as a result. And so that's kind of exactly what we've done. So we explored various different plants across a wide range of habitats, and eventually came across what's called Typha latifolia, or probably more commonly known as bulrush or cattail, which is those sort of brown, fluffy, seed-headed plants that you'll see around wetlands. And they're an amazing plant that has a huge number of sort of environmental benefits. They're able to extract huge amounts of damaging nutrients from the ground. They can sequester massive amounts of carbon. They provide habitats within the wetlands for many different types of species. And wetlands as an environment are unbelievably precious as a global mechanism, because they hold twice the carbon of all the trees in the world combined, and about 40% of all living species rely on them for survival in some way, including humans. And so we recognized that there was this plant and this environment which had a huge amount of benefit. And then the past sort of 2.5 years, we've explored those fluffy seed fibres that you get in those Typha heads. How can we turn them into a useful textile for the fashion industry? So we've been working on technologies which are now patent pending on extracting those fibres and optimizing them for use in a case. And that's what turned into BioPuff. So these fibres which we gain from these innovative, these sort of new plants, are now turning into hopefully textiles that we'll see in our clothes very soon.
Wow, incredible. So just to go back slightly, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about regenerative agriculture? Because obviously that is regenerative fashion, like the BioPuff. So, and I think that's a term that's quite new for a lot of people. So could you just give a little bit of an explanation what that exactly means?
Absolutely. So regenerative agriculture comes in many different kind of forms, and it is a relatively sort of new term that that can be sort of bandied about quite casually these days as well. But the way that we see regenerative agriculture is where you have an environment which has become degraded or damaged in some way. And so a key example of this, and the example that we work with, is wetlands. So wetlands are a very precious environment that has been built up over thousands of years of creation. However, over the past 300 years, we've lost about 89% of all wetlands. And the reason is that it's because they've been drained and damaged for conventional agriculture or industry. And what that means is if you imagine a sort of essentially a very wet bog or marsh or field, what has been previously done is big ditches have been dug to drain all of the water out of that field and create this drainage, and that enables machinery essentially to be placed onto the land, and so you can grow your conventional crops and make use of the rich soils which are underneath there, held up in the marshy soils. And unfortunately, what that means is you also gain a huge amount of carbon emissions and obviously lose all of the environmental benefits that wetland holds. The regenerative agricultural part of this is being able to try and transform that environment, which is now used for conventional crops, this field which was once a marshy bog and is now a dry farmland essentially. It's about how can we turn it as far back into its original form as possible, but still make it useful for the farmer who relies on that land for their income and their livelihood. And for us, that's what regenerative agriculture is. So it's about re-wetting that field, getting the water level back up to keep the carbon trapped inside the ground, and growing different crops such as bulrush, so that the farmer can still earn an income from being able to from people like us buying the crop and turning it into textiles such as BioPuff. That's what and the benefits of regenerative agriculture are huge. It's about 20 tons of CO2 per hectare will be saved each year. And the push from industry, from governments, is really growing with sort of moving this kind of policy on as well.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. How are farmers reacting to this new way? Are they a little bit skeptical, or how are you seeing that?
Well, it can be a tricky conversation for sure, but it's the way that it's framed. So farmers, of course, have the stewards of their land. They rely on it for their livelihoods and for their families. Of course, there is a level of risk aversion when it comes to doing anything dramatic to the land. I mean, that's perfectly natural, and I don't think we expected anything different from that. However, it's about reframing of what we're looking at. This isn't about sort of trying some sort of like radical method of farming, which, you know, is going to go out of fashion in a few years or something like that. This is about building more resilience into farmers' land to actually help sort of resist against some of the extremer effects of climate change, which we're going to see in the coming years. By re-wetting land, such as the regenerative agricultural processes that we encourage, you're not just, you know, saving carbon and improving the local ecosystem environment. You're also massively protecting yourselves against things like flooding risks, like runoff, over being able to manage higher levels of nutrients. There's many different benefits that come from it, other than just the financial and immediate biodiversity and carbon gains from it. And so I was actually in Cambridge last week for 2 days at the first sort of conference of this year on this type of agriculture. And you really are actually, and that was attended by farmers who are now really starting to engage in this. And it's also helped along by policies. So this is one of DEFRA's key policy seeds that they're trying to push forward as well. They want to see more peatlands and wetlands in the UK re-wetted. It's a priority for them, because if they're going to meet their net zero goals, it has to happen. Yeah. And so for us, I think it's about encouraging farmers. They're not doing this within isolation, but all the stakeholders within the industry are moving together. And that requires collaboration and connection, which is a really key part of what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you re-wet the land? Like, is that a complicated process?
So again, that requires a level of collaboration and connection, because you have what's called internal drainage boards within the UK who very carefully manage the hydrological sort of needs and requirements of different sections of land. For example, if you look at the Cambridge Fens, huge source of peatland and a huge source of agricultural wealth in the UK, but they've designed, and in like thousands of hectares, they've designed an entire water system to just drain as much water out of there as possible. That's all it's doing year round. It's like managing, how do we keep the water levels from not getting too high? And so what you can actually do is use those exact systems which are currently designed for draining water to do the opposite, to reflood. So that's about using pumps, it's about filling in ditches and enabling that water table to rise.
Right. Okay.
What it's going to start off as is perhaps some of these fields which stay wetter than usual year round. They'll start off, well, maybe a farm might experiment with that field. I can't grow anything on this anyway, so I'll try this in this way. And then slowly we're seeing it grow into larger pilot projects, larger and then eventually complete landscape recovery and change as well, which is really the goal of what we're trying to move towards.
Yeah, no, incredible. And how long would that take to do?
As a process to re-wet and reconstruct a site. So the actual groundworks, depending on the size of the plot, can take about a month.
Not so long.
So it's not a massive process to raise that water level, and then the establishment of a new plant or crop. The bulrush takes about 18 months to reestablish as new, as a new plant, but then it's not a crop you have to seed every year. So you'll get at least 6 years of growth from that crop itself. And it doesn't require fertilizer. It doesn't require, other than raising the water level, it doesn't require sort of irrigation or anything like that. So there's other obvious financial benefits to it as well.
Yeah, and it's easy to manage then, isn't it? If you're not having to constantly fertilize or
exactly.
farm it. Yeah. Wow, incredible. And how do you see regenerative agriculture? How do you see it in fashion? Are brands becoming more interested in these kind of different ways of doing things?
Definitely. I mean, we see a huge amount of interest from the fashion industry, interested on connecting their kind of customers and the end consumers and connecting them to environmental positivity, which is happening further up the supply chain. And really, I think we're at the early stages of exploring. And, the fashion industry is let's be honest, fairly far behind when it comes to environmental movements and goals. And I think we're starting to see how this might happen, what the end consumer might be sort of interacting with, what information is important for them to be able to see when they're buying a garment, and how can they make a wiser, more informed choice on the clothes which they decide to buy. And that will be a mixture of sort of legislation and also some of these thought leaders within the fashion industry as well who are pushing it. So obviously some brands have much more environmentally driven missions than others. But we do see a real interest, and we've actually had fashion brands come to our agricultural sites as well, and actually sort of witness the harvesting and witness the kind of environmental work we're doing. And so that's really lovely from our perspective to see this engagement actually to the level of like coming and witnessing it and being a part of that process.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And is it more luxury brands that are more interested in this type of thing, or are you seeing more contemporary?
We're seeing interest from across the board. It's there are real challenges when it comes to next generation textiles coming into fashion industry and coming into production. It's the numbers, which I'm sure you're aware, surrounding the fashion industry are mind-boggling in terms of the amount of production that is created. And if we want to offset any meaningful part of that, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of replacing a lot of those materials. And so quite often, unfortunately, that means that some of the larger brands or the luxury brands, the brands who have perhaps more financial flexibility and backing, are the ones that might be able to start using the materials. But we've been working actually very closely on smaller, more contemporary brands more recently to try and approach the industry from various different angles. So yes, we're working with the larger, perhaps luxury fashion houses and those types of companies. But also we like to work with the smaller, more agile companies who can perhaps get a line of clothing out sooner. If you go and approach I don't know, some of the companies who are I don't know, in the hundreds of millions of dollars worth of revenue, they will give you a timeline for a new material that will probably be at least 2 years before it's in any clothing. A lot of these brands will be designing now 2026 collections and beyond. And when we're trying to meet sort of 2030 targets and things like that, that unfortunately needs to be quicker. And so it's important we work with a range of different companies to make sure that happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, fascinating. What challenges have you faced, as a startup?
We've faced all sorts of challenges. Like we get new challenges every single day. It's difficult building a supply chain from scratch we're not creating like a different form of cotton or linen, which is farmed in a different way or something like that. We're building a whole new supply chain with a plant which hasn't been grown conventionally anywhere in the world, and connecting that through machinery, which we've designed and built ourselves, and then trying to make that compatible with conventional textile machinery as well, which is perhaps in garment manufacturers' factories. And so there's so many different challenges there that present themselves. They're challenges that can be overcome. It's like engineering challenges. At the end of the day, hard things can be solved if you put enough time and effort into them. And so I would say that that's sort of one of the like main challenges we do. It's a lot of problem solving. And then the other is sort of more the kind of, I guess, the soft challenges and work in terms of human behavioral change, trying to get brands to take, I don't know, risks, as it were, in new materials. That's a challenge within itself. Trying to encourage like policies to move in the right direction towards more environmental standards, I think. And there's just, we are 4 founders who came from a postgraduate course and we're straight out of university. We haven't built a startup before, so it's a huge amount of learning that we make along that journey as well. And I think we've done very well to get this journey, get to this point, and continually, we've always had, I guess, confidence boosters along the way, which, like when we won the Global Change Award, and last week, actually, we finally announced that BioPuff has been Cradle to Cradle Gold certified as well. And so these kind of indicators that we are moving in the right direction and that we are getting there. But sure, no, there's been all sorts of challenges along the way.
Yeah, I can imagine. But amazing, such great work. Congratulations. It's fascinating, and yeah, I look forward to seeing more of these kind of startups actually, being born, because we really do need action quick in the fashion industry, because like you said, they have been very slow to adopt.
Definitely.
Yeah. So Julian, how do you envision the future of fashion?
Well, I mean, the future of fashion, the vision that I see, and the one that I would like to see, and the one that we're trying to build, is one where you're able to go into a shop and buy clothes and be able to transparently see the benefit that that's had to an ecosystem, which is further up the supply chain, actually be able to understand that the products that make up the textiles that construct our clothes are not just doing less harm, but actually creating positive change. And I'd like to see a world where we work in symbiosis with nature, kind of as nature as well, working to value and reconstruct some of the environments which we have sadly degraded and lost over time into building a more biodiverse system, one which isn't a pure massive monoculture, but a mosaic of different ecosystems working together to create innovative, great products that come out of it, such as textiles, that we can then use as well, and slowly start to see that circular model develop. And that is one and I should also say that that's just one aspect of the fashion industry and how it's going to turn itself around. One aspect is perhaps regenerative agriculture, working with ecosystems and nature. Another one, of course, is looking at mass recycling and working out how we can do more with our waste. A better fashion system of tomorrow is once again going to be a eclectic mix of solutions, not a singular one. And we love to see our colleagues who are working in other startups and areas within the textile space as well, who are also doing amazing work and seeing amazing change as well within their own sort of missions. And I think, that is what I see as the future of the fashion industry. And if we're honest with ourselves, one of the main things that if we do want to have like a healthier, sustainable, better fashion industry, is it needs to be a slower one as well. One where we don't buy so much, where we keep our clothes for longer, where we fix them, and because that is still one of, if not the main threat to change not being able to happen.
Yeah, it's like a shift in mindset on all levels, isn't it? It's not just brands and manufacturing companies doing different things. It's also about the consumer changing their mindset and just going slow, like less is more, instead of this, over the last, I don't know how many years of just constant consuming and just having more and more, and often not wearing half of it, because we only wear 20% of 80% of our wardrobe. And so
well, exactly.
most of us have way too many clothes, and the clothes we do have, I find that most people don't realize actually where they're from, who made them, how they got to the store. There's such a disconnect with clothes, and often, like there's even harmful dyes and chemicals in clothes that people don't even realize. Yeah, everyone's very obsessed with like exercise and well-being and eating right and mental health, but we're not worrying about what we're putting on our skin, so it's quite scary.
Absolutely.
Sometimes when I teach at the university and I talk about this, people are like, oh, I could be wearing jeans that have harmful dyes. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. But we don't question anything. We just walk in a store and buy.
Absolutely. I think it is going to require mindset change. And I think we do need this kind of paradigm shift from the fast fashion world we see today to a slower movement. And also, as part of that, finding different ways where we can perhaps achieve the same level of excitement and individuality in how we dress ourselves. And part of that might be other, innovative post-purchase manufacturing like solutions, right? So I go and buy my garment, and then I don't know, perhaps I wait a little longer, but it will be constructed after I've bought it, rather than the current mechanism, which is go and make as many garments as possible, and then do everything you can to sell them, even if it means sort of selling them at like 5 pence a piece or something like that. And maybe, maybe we'll move more into the digital realm, and the metaverse might have solutions for our individuality and how we build our identities through fashion and the way that we dress as well. I look forward to seeing all sorts of different ways that that's achieved, because I also would say that I also love fashion, and I love the individuality and the identity that can be created from taking pride in it as well. And I don't see a world where that doesn't exist as well, because I think that would be a sadder, less diverse, less interesting world too.
Oh, absolutely, because fashion is art form at the end of the day, and it's not about taking that away, it's just making it more conscious and responsible.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Thank you, Julian. It's been wonderful chatting to you and learning more about Saltyco and regenerative agriculture and fashion. Fascinating. I look forward to following you and seeing the developments. So where can people find you and Saltyco on the internet?
Well, you can follow us on Instagram at saltyco.uk, and it's and same address for our website, www.saltyco.uk. And yeah, if we're always interested to hear from people, any opportunities from agriculture through to fashion and collaboration, always excited to hear. But thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you so much for coming on for your time. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please subscribe to the Lou Stokes podcast. Rate and review in the Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're tuning in from. I'd be so grateful. Also, check out the show notes to learn more about my guests and learn more about me on my website, www.loustokes.com. Until next time, be inspired, take action, and be the change you want to see in the world.